Check it out, Startup Nation. I know many of you are trying to improve your marketing performance, right? You have your business or your e-commerce store and you're trying to increase that brand awareness. No worries, I got you. You should listen to the brand new Keep Optimizing podcast. That's optimizing with an S and not a Z. It's a marketing podcast that will provide you with not only the latest tips and advice in the game, but also you will hear from experts in their field when it comes to email marketing, SEO, and more. This is a must-listen-to podcast for my e-commerce entrepreneurs. It's hosted by Chloe Thomas, who is a 15-year marketing expert, best-selling author, and award-winning podcast host. It's already a top 20 marketing podcast in 7 countries. So clearly, you're going to get amazing value every episode. So as you can see, Startup Nation, you're in good hands with my girl CT. So listen and subscribe to the Keep Optimizing podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you like to get your favorite podcast. You can also get more information at keepoptimizing.com. The link is there in the show notes.
It's time to be about that life, the startup life. Here's your host, Dominic Lawson.
All right, Startup Nation. So I hope you're ready to receive some value today. My name is Dominic Lawson, and this is The Startup Life, the show for entrepreneurs and career-minded professionals. You know, Startup Nations, as workplaces are adapting to sudden and unprecedented changes due to the global pandemic, leaders must find new strengths within their teams, which is why we have a fantastic guest here on the show today. She is an award-winning author and an Inc. Top 100 leadership speaker. She's also the founder of Let's Grow Leaders, where they provide practical leadership training, breakthrough results, and inspire employee engagement. She is also the author of Courageous Cultures, How to Build Teams of Micro-Innovators, Problem Solvers, and Customer Advocates. She is Karin Hurt. KH, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on. Definitely appreciate your time today. You know, we're all trying to figure out this global pandemic and everything and leadership. So definitely glad to have you on the show today. So before I kind of get started, kind of share with us your new normal through this whole pandemic world that we're kind of living in right now.
Yeah, I mean, just like you and everyone, we've all been on a fast pivot, right, to do the best we can with what we have and where we are. And
right.
It was a massive transition for us. I recall in March, we were sitting at breakfast at a Marriott Courtyard, and we were in Seattle, and on the big screen TVs that were everywhere, everybody was pulling out saying, all these big tech companies were like, oh, we're all sending everybody's going to be working from home. And we are about to go into an office of one of our clients.
Right.
And we're like, oh my gosh, our whole world is about to change because pretty much all of our programs were in-person programs,
right.
Long-term, leadership programs, keynote speaking, big conferences.
Of course.
And, of course you have that moment of panic, like what is going to happen to our business? But it has been fascinating. We have just been on this journey to really pivot to everything live online. And in so many ways, some of it has been a real blessing as we have been able to work more easily around the world, and so we've been doing a lot of global programs. We just got off of, literally 15 minutes ago, a global summit where we had 200 people in countries all over the world.
Wow,
that's such a neat opportunity, right?
Absolutely.
So as much as it's been terrible, it's also been so interesting and good. And so that's what we've been doing. Part of that involved, building out a studio in our basement so that it can feel, really professional, getting all the right lights, getting all the equipment, all that stuff. But it's been good.
Right. No, it's funny you mentioned that, and I definitely understand that part because in March I was doing the show from the radio station, and so once all COVID hit and stuff like that, I had to buy equipment so I can all do it from home, and so I haven't been back to the station ever since. So now I'm just recording, and then I send them the audio file, and then and then just go from there. So it's kind of cool, because you kind of get to adjust on the fly a little bit, but it's definitely a great thought exercise, I guess, for sure, to kind of figure it out. For sure. But, enough about that. We brought you on to talk about your fantastic book, Courageous Cultures. And Startup Nation, if you want to purchase that book, we have a link there in the show notes if you're listening to the replay on the podcast for easy access. So it's called Courageous Cultures. Kind of talk about what you were seeing, what you and David were seeing, the co-author on the book, and also your husband as well. Kind of talk about, what you were seeing that kind of prompted the book.
Yeah, so it was interesting. We were noticing a consistent pattern as we were working with our clients across a variety of industries.
Sure.
That we would go in and we would talk to the senior most levels of the organization. We would say, why don't people speak up? Why don't they share their ideas? Why am I the only one who finds these problems? Mm-hmm. Then we would be working and doing training or work at the supervisor level, and we would hear things like, nobody wants my ideas. The last time I spoke up, I got in trouble. Nothing ever happens anyway. We thought, are you all working for the same company? So employees have ideas and leaders really do want to hear them most of the time. And yet somehow there was a disconnect. So we partnered with the University of North Colorado Social Research Lab on a really extensive research that was both quantitative and qualitative to get underneath this question about if people were holding back ideas, what kind of ideas were they holding back? What is preventing people from speaking up? And what is this concept of, FOSU, what we call fear of speaking up? Mm-hmm. And the companies were doing it well. What was different about their cultures? And so we took that research and then we took the findings and translated that into a roadmap of really practical tools and techniques you can use to implement what we call a more courageous culture.
Right. Right. No, and I'm fascinated by this because we see all the time about, especially with a lot of people in our audience who kind of leave, the traditional 9-to-5 and build companies and stuff like that. And they're trying to build cultures themselves. But I know a lot of times we see people who, they don't want to speak up for fear of not necessarily reprimand, but just kind of like not hearing the word no. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So, it's interesting because this applies to startups too, because you need to navigate your own narrative, which is really the first step of creating a courageous culture. So, what is your own story you're telling yourself about fear, and, are you willing to speak up and speak the truth to your suppliers, to your customers, right? Are you able to show up with confident humility and do that well? And, I think that one of the mistakes that I see often, people, especially at the very beginning of a startup, is that they're so worried about getting customers or keeping customers that they'll do anything, and that does not set the stage to build a solid foundation of a company. And so I think it's about, really being clear about your values. What are you willing to do? And being willing to stand up when somebody is asking you to do something that doesn't right.
For sure. Thank you for sharing that. In the book, you talk about, competing for the best talent. And one of the things I thought was fascinating was that like now, more than ever, organizations are not just competing with talent with other organizations. They're now competing with the gig economy, which I thought was kind of fascinating. Kind of talk about that a little bit, if you don't mind, Karin.
Yeah. So, people have more choices than ever.
Absolutely.
And I think we're noticing that particularly now, right? In the middle of this pandemic, I hear it all the time. People are like, you know what? Life is short and I want to have more control. And so if you are not creating an environment where people feel like their voice is heard, that their ideas matter, they're going to go somewhere else where their ideas will be heard, even if that's to build, to go out on their own and to become a freelancer. And I think you're seeing more and more people considering that choice. So if you are a company, a startup company or a fast growing company, how are you creating an environment that is allowing people to bring their whole selves to work, to bring their ideas, to actively contribute, to speak up? And when you can do that well, then people feel like there's part of something bigger because, all the easy jobs are being automated, and so we need now people showing up to do the work that, only humans can do. And that's, That's connecting with deep empathy with customers. It's thinking creatively about ways to make things better.
Gotcha. I want to ask a follow-up because you talked about automation, and that's something that we've been hearing quite a lot lately, like where, automation and its correlation with jobs, whether it be enhancing jobs, replacing jobs, or wherever the case may be. But let's talk about like in the aspect of how automation kind of helps, job performance and stuff like that. And a lot of times it may help job performance, but it limits that human element, that human interaction. As companies scale and grow, what are some of those ways, some of those strategies that people can kind of keep that human element in a age of automation, in your opinion?
Yeah. So it really starts with making a connection and human to human and getting to know the people that you're working with, not just in terms of what they're doing for your KPIs,
right?
But what's weighing on their hearts and minds right now. And I will tell you, I see companies doing this really well right now and really bad right now. And,
gotcha.
So we were doing a global conference the other day, and I will tell you, this senior leader happened to be at Amazon. He did this the best that I have seen yet.
Okay.
And so he's talking to his team. Now it's all over, it's all virtual, right? But he looks right into the green dot. I say like on your computer, that little green dot at the top, right? So you're looking right into the camera. And he said, here's the thing. I have been dealing with this since China. He's like, and at first we thought this was going to be a problem for our Chinese teams. And I'm like, oh my gosh, our poor Chinese teams, we're going to have to all rally and support them. And then, now we're in Italy. Oh, now this is a problem for our Italy teams. And then, now it's in the United States. I said, I've got to tell you, I am exhausted. This is really weighing on me. I have 2 small children at home. My partner is trying to carry the weight. I feel guilty. I'm tired, and here's the thing. If I'm feeling this way, I know every one of you has a story too.
Right.
And it's not the same as my story. For some of you, it may be that you have, elderly parents that you're worried about, or you've lost a loved one to COVID.
Right.
And he just went on and on. And he said, so here's the thing. Right now, in this meeting, what we're going to do next is figure out how we're not just going to survive, but we are going to thrive in the next 18 months. And I need you to share your stories, and I need you to come up with ideas around these 3 strategic areas. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is beautiful, right? Because he made it okay to not be okay.
Right.
Yeah, and safe. And you could have heard a virtual pin drop. And guess what happened next?
What's that?
Everybody, right? Like wildfire ideas, and great things, But if he had just started like, okay, everybody, thanks so much for coming to our summit. Here's what I've got 3 strategic areas that we need to improve the business in the next 18 months. Okay, so we're going to do these breakout rooms. Everybody, all set. Here are the instructions. Let's go. Right? It would not have had that same impact. So I think that's the first thing is, how do you just really connect at a human level?
Right. No, I appreciate that. That's an amazing story, because it's funny because like we, in the business world, in the business culture, especially here in the United States, let's just be honest. It really is kind of like, gotta be first, dog eat dog and stuff like that. So you don't really hear too many stories like that. So I appreciate you sharing that story with us.
Oh, thank you.
No worries. No worries. And so that kind of leads me to my next question, which, this gentleman kind of sounds like the opposite of a courage crusher, if you will, that you talk about in your book. Kind of talk about what a courage crusher is, Karin.
Yes. Yeah. So, I will tell you, so when I said people are either doing this great or they're doing it really bad,
right.
I hear the horror stories, right? You can't write a blog called Let's Grow Leaders without having people write you all day long.
Of course.
telling you their terrible stories. But it's, there's stories of shame, blame, and intimidation. And, I got a call from this, bless her heart, she's a Gen Z, and she's one of the people who's not working from home. She is managing a small restaurant.
Right.
And, this is a startup. So it's this mom and pop. They have three restaurants, and they've got three, very young, inexperienced managers trying to do these things. Well, I mean, they are tearing into these kids. Why is this not that? Why is that not happening? You're not moving fast enough. Why did it? Right? And she's like, all day long. And here's the impact that's going to have on her. It's not, she's going to quit. That's the first thing.
Right.
But this is also her very first experience with a real job.
Right.
And what is she thinking about the world of work? She was starting to say things like, maybe I just should, I don't know, move to the country, get a dog,
Right.
And that's really, I'm worried for us as a society about, with all the fears and stress that people have right now.
Of course.
And then weighed on top of that, if you've got toxic leadership, shutting people down, and how that's going to translate to our future. So I think it's really particularly important that we show up with empathy and curiosity about how we can work together to make things better.
Absolutely. No, that empathy piece is so key, especially within an organization. So I'm so glad that you shared that for sure. And one of the things I love about your book is that, and we get books all the time, where, you read it, it's a great read, and then you put it on the shelf, right? But your book is one of those, what I like to call one of those working, living, breathing books where there's activities. You have the first tracks section after a few of the chapters and stuff like that. Is that kind of like an extension of the in-person type of not webinars, but like facilitations and stuff like that you do, that you kind of placed in that book? Kind of talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely. Thank you. Absolutely. Yeah. So we designed this book to be something that teams could read together and then actually go and implement them right away. So we take you through a 7-step process, and you're right that there's the first track section that gives you the activities, and we actually have a free executive strategy guide you can download that's a companion to the book, because we're all about being really practical.
Right.
And then our programs, our Courageous Cultures programs, are a way that we really lead you through and say, okay, literally we just also got off. We've done two of these programs today already. And so one was she picked 5 strategic areas where they really needed great ideas. So, one was like bringing out ideas to manage right now in a global diverse workforce. How do we create global engagement for process improvement? How do we do flawless transmission and execution? So, real strategic things.
Right.
But then what we do is we take them through and we ground them in the research. And then we say, okay, here are the tools, and teach them how to use the tools. And then in breakout rooms, so we had about 160 folks in this meeting from around the world. We broke into groups of 5 or 6 people, gave them each one of these topics, and then they worked through. They used our Only Ugly process to figure out what's really at the root cause here. And then they used our idea model. Why is this interesting? D, doable, E, engaging, and a couple of A, key actions to then vet their ideas and come up with some solutions. And the level of engagement, and what's always is so interesting is how fast you can get to the good ideas. Like when you have a process, you don't need an all-day strategic planning session. If you give us a couple of hours and an engaged team, I guarantee you we can leave you with some really good ideas to take forward into 2021.
For sure. And I'm glad you said that, because I think a lot of times, you don't hear too many people who are in your space and do what you do to say, like, we don't need an all day session. A lot of times people who do what you do or similar to what you do, they're trying to, let's be honest, they're trying to milk the clock and milk the client for everything that they get. You know what I mean? And I think it's just more impactful the way that you just described it. So I appreciate you sharing that and that transparency.
Oh, thank you.
For sure. And you talked about the idea model. Kind of go deeper with that, because I got a copy of your book. First of all, thank you for that, by the way. And I also got I'm losing my train of thought here. A bookmark with the idea model on it as well. And I appreciate that as well. But kind of go through that idea model a little bit that you kind of came up with, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So one of the things that we found in our research is that 40% of our participants said, I lack the confidence to share an idea. And so, although when we first started thinking about the book, we thought about it more for executives and senior leaders to create a culture. But then we were like, you know what? We also need to teach people, right? The employees at every level of the business, how to share ideas in a way that's not clumsy. Because that's part of what happens, right? You've got like the idea grenadier who brings you like all these half-baked ideas and just lobbing them at you, waiting for you to do something with, or they're overly emotional or they're half-baked. So that's why, this idea model is a way to think through your idea to give it the best chance of being heard.
Gotcha.
So it stands for I. Why is this idea interesting? And that means, why is this idea strategically aligned with where we need to head as a business? So this assumes you've given your team some clarity about what is important to you right now. What are the most important things the next 3 months? Now, what ideas do you have that are interesting, that are aligned with those? D, is this doable? Meaning, is this something we could actually pull off right now? And I think this is particularly important now, right? Because we all have more work than we can possibly do. It's all about prioritization. So, teach your team to think about, not talking about some wild and crazy idea that, would take a gazillion resources. We're talking about, give us ideas right now that we could pull off. Then E is engaging. And this is where you get your team to begin thinking about stakeholders, or who else could they involve in the process, and then come to you with a couple of key actions, specific next steps that they would recommend. Because a lot of times people will tell us, oh, I don't think my boss really wants to hear ideas, or I'm scared. I'm like, if you go to your boss and say, I really care about this team, I want us to be successful, I have an idea. Here's why I think this idea is interesting. It's really strategically aligned with what you said was our number one priority between now and the end of the year, right? Here's what I think. This is why I know we can do it. I've already got a bit of a plan. Here's who I think we need to talk to HR. We need to talk to IT. I've already pre-stakeholdered that with, the HR director. She's on board. And hey, here, what I would recommend are a couple of next steps. If you do that, at a minimum, your boss is going to be going, oh, wow, this is a real critical thinker.
Right.
Who cares about the business, right?
Sure.
There's no way they're going to be negative. Even if your idea isn't implemented, you've at least gained credibility.
For sure. Thank you for sharing that. And do a quick reset. Once again, Startup Nation, we're talking to Karin Hurt, the author of Courageous Cultures, How to Build Teams of Micro Innovators, Problem Solvers, and Customer Advocates. Once again, if you're listening to the replay on the podcast, we have a link there in the show notes for you to purchase that book to kind of put in your entrepreneurial toolkit. I definitely think you should do that. Karin, I want to ask you this, because in the book, there's a quick story about a nurse and who talks about like trying to overcome, this kind of hotshot doctor and stuff like that. And people are kind of asking this group, why don't you just leave if it's so bad? Why don't you just leave what you're doing? And she said, well, I love my patients. I love what I do. I don't think I should have to leave because of, this guy or whatever. But it made me think of two industries that it just seems like ripe for could be, kind of reorganized or have a little bit more courageous cultures, which is healthcare is one, but also education. Because when I think of nurses, I think of teachers and how a lot of teachers want to stay close to and connected with their students, especially now more than ever. So I guess with all that rambling, I wanted to ask this question, which is, when you go into an organization, and I imagine it doesn't always go smoothly. There's sometimes there's some non-believer who gives you a little pushback, right? Kind of talk about how you walk through that process, if you don't mind, Karin.
Yeah. So, I think that is partly is well, first let me share with you that with the issue with the nurse, because,
absolutely.
It was interesting because that was in a face-to-face in-person program. And it was after I had worked with them, a small group of people, about 30 for 2 days straight, like on all kinds of things. And it was heartbreaking because, when you lead a program, you start to fall in love with the people.
Of course.
And she, of course, was one of my favorites.
Gotcha.
Not that you get favorites, but, and, when I said, why don't you leave? Because in that particular circumstance, none of those tools were going to work on that jerk.
Right.
Like and I think there are some, I'm a full on believer that you need to manage your boss and manage up and use all the tools that we have.
For sure.
And sometimes there are really bad actors. And this guy was one of those, right? I mean, he literally was trying to do things that could have potentially hurt a child. She had to speak up. So I said to her, why don't you leave? She said, I love the kids. And at that point I said, in front of all these people at this client that had hired me, this organization is a big place. He's one guy.
Right.
You don't have to suffer. And she reached out to me on LinkedIn a couple of months later and said, you were right. And I found another place still in the same organization. And I am so much happier, Right. And so I think that's part of it. If you are in a really toxic situation, then get out.
Right.
Don't, and if more of us do that, then the bad guys can't win because no one will want to work for them.
That's true.
But if we suffer in silence, so I think that's that first thing. The next thing I would say is if you are really wanting to create a courageous culture, but your organization isn't fully there yet, start small. You don't need to go out and declare, big PowerPoint presentation, we're going to create a courageous culture. Just figure out one area where you really need a great idea and go ask a courageous question, which is specific and vulnerable and saying, hey, we really need great ideas around this. What's one thing that you think we could do to make this better? And as you start to ask those questions one by one, people and making it safe and responding to those ideas, so that people know that you're doing something with them, that you will build that credibility and will get easier every time. Because the paradox of a courageous culture is that it takes less daily courage to show up, right? If I know that the way we do things around here is we speak up, we share ideas, the default is to contribute, then I don't have to think twice about, should I speak up? What will happen? Right? No, you're just bringing the ideas.
Right.
And so I think, and the other thing I would say is find the others. Who else in your organization is like-minded, who you could partner with so that you don't feel so lonely, because leadership shouldn't feel lonely.
Right. Right. Thank you for sharing that. And when you talk about, not having to have those daily moments of courage, it makes me think of, and the ideas can kind of flow. It makes me think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like when those bottom parts of the pyramid are kind of met, you're able to kind of get closer and closer to self-actualization. I never thought about it in the sense of what you were just talking about it, but you can kind of have that self-actualization within the scope of your career in that regard. So I appreciate you sharing. I didn't think about it like that before.
Oh, you're welcome.
For sure. So I wanted to ask you this because I was on Twitter. I was on your Twitter page, and I saw that you and David had shared a new article from CNBC Make It. I love CNBC Make It, by the way. But nice. You have an article there talking about stop asking how can we improve. Research says that the best CEOs do these three things when asking for feedback. Kind of talk about the content in that article a little bit and those three things a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So, I think the thing about that is, one of the things that we found in the research is that people say, well, I have an open door. And that's not enough, because for most people, it takes more than an open door, right? Because it takes courage to still walk through an open door.
Right.
So when you want to show up, and if you really want people's ideas, first you need to be very clear about two things: that you do want ideas, and where do you want ideas? And then go out and ask courageous questions. And a courageous question differs from a, how can we make it better question in two ways. It's specific and it's vulnerable. So, for example, I will give you an example of Don Yeager, who's the COO that we talk about him in this article. And he says, what is one policy we have that just sucks? And he asks his frontline people that. Now, COO walking around and asking his frontline employees that question, first of all, it's vulnerable, because he is assuming even though he's created the policies, right, that we have them, and they might be rubbing our customers the wrong way.
Gotcha.
And it's specific because you're only asking for one, which doesn't feel so intimidating.
Right.
Right. And so, another question, what is the one problem we have that no one is talking about? Okay. So here, that's vulnerable because I'm assuming we aren't there fully yet at a courageous culture because people are not talking about something we need to. What's one of those things? Yeah. And so, by asking these courageous questions, you are really making it easier for people to contribute. And then, of course, the final thing is if you are clear about where you need ideas, and then you're asking great questions, but you don't do anything with the ideas, then you've got a problem too. And so the third is respond with a regard, And so 50% of the participants in our research said the reason that they don't share an idea is that nothing will ever happen. Now, here's the real tragedy. Sometimes things are happening with those ideas. There just isn't the feedback loop.
Right.
And so, we say, responding with regard looks like, thank you for contributing the idea, starting with gratitude, then adding information, meaning letting people know what is happening with that idea or not happening with that idea or other things that they need to consider to flesh out the idea.
Right.
And then ending with an invitation to continue to contribute more. And when you can do those three things, be clear that you want ideas and what an idea would accomplish, getting curious where you go out and ask courageous questions, and then you respond with regard, that is a very easy way to, get more people contributing better ideas.
All right, Startup Nation, so we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. We got to pay some bills. Once again, my name is Dominic Lawson, and you're listening to The Startup Life. Check it out, Startup Nation. I know many of you are trying to improve your marketing performance, right? You have your business or your e-commerce store and you're trying to increase that brand awareness. No worries, I got you. You should listen to the brand new Keep Optimizing podcast. That's optimizing with an S and not a Z. It's a marketing podcast that will provide you with not only the latest tips and advice in the game, but also you will hear from experts in their field when it comes to email marketing, SEO, and more. This is a must-listen-to podcast for my e-commerce entrepreneurs. It's hosted by Chloe Thomas, who is a 15-year marketing expert, best-selling author, and award-winning podcast host. It's already a top 20 marketing podcast in 7 countries. So clearly, you're going to get amazing value every episode. So as you can see, Startup Nation, you're in good hands with my girl CT. So listen and subscribe to the Keep Optimizing podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you like to get your favorite podcast. You can also get more information at keepoptimizing.com. The link is there in the show notes. Oralex powers this episode of The Startup Life. Startup Nation, as a podcaster, radio host, and business owner, I know a thing or two about the need for your message to come through clearly to your target audience. The last thing you want when trying to close a big deal over the phone or giving a sales presentation in your conference room is to have the person you are talking to be distracted by either the fact that you sound like you're in a warehouse or an outside noise like a fire truck. Trust me, Startup Nation, I know this all too well from experience. And that is why Oralex has your back. Oralex Acoustics creates professionally tested products that you can trust in a commercial space or at home. Better office acoustics improves intelligibility when video conferencing or generic conversation, reduces stress, and helps build a proactive work atmosphere. From a home studio for my content creators to your office space downtown, your gear performs better in an acoustically treated room. Trust me, you are in good hands with Oralex as they are the #1 brand in acoustics, providing trusted solutions for over 40 years. Also, you can download the Oralex Acoustic Treatment mobile app in the Apple or Google Play Store to give you specifically designed and instantaneous recommendations for various room types. Go to Oralex.com and use the promo code STARTUP in all caps for 10% off your entire order. The link is there in the show notes if you are listening to the replay on the podcast. So if you are ready to stop sounding like you're having a sales meeting in a sports arena, go with Oralex. Professional audio made simple. Tresta powers this episode of The Startup Life. Okay, Startup Nation, I want to talk to you about our sponsor, Tresta. Tresta is an app for iPhone and Android that lets you do business calling and texting from anywhere. I know so many entrepreneurs that are still using their personal phone number for business calls. It can get complicated drawing the line between your personal and professional life. Startup Nation, this is the best business phone app out there. Whether you just need a business phone number or if your team is ready for a complete business phone system, Tresta is totally flexible and can grow with your business. And it's all unlimited calling, texting, and all of the powerful call management features like auto attendance, call recording, user groups, and more for just $15 per user per month. With Tresta, there's no contract, and you don't need any special hardware, just your smartphone you're already using. Tresta is easy to configure, so you can set everything up yourself, all online, avoiding all the hassle and high overhead costs of setting up a traditional business phone system, which is important because as entrepreneurs, we are always trying to cut cost and time. They're offering a 30-day free trial so you can see if Tresta's virtual phone system is right for you. Communicate smarter and more efficiently with Tresta. Start now at Tresta.com/startup life. That's TRESTA.com/startup life. The link is there in the show notes if you're listening on the podcast. Tresta, business communication simplified. All right, Startup Nation, welcome back as we continue our conversation with today's guest here on The Startup Life. For sure. And I love that, and it's a recurring theme in our conversation, asking those courageous questions, if you will. Sorry, I don't know why that's being a tongue twister for me right now. Asking those courageous questions, because it really it goes a lot deeper. And I think I like that because just saying, what can I do better just seems like putting a Band-Aid over it. You know what I mean? Right. And so right. I definitely appreciate that. So Startup Nation, when you check out that article on CNBC Make It, there's actually a picture of Michael Scott. And I was just on your Facebook page and you were just saying that, can we now say that you and David have collaborated with, Steve Carell? I'm going to say yes. All right. Excellent. I'm going to say yes, but I got to ask this because this is low hanging fruit. Clearly you're probably fans of The Office. So I'm curious, what are some other things that we can learn from a Michael Scott as we go forth in our careers with and having courageous cultures within an organization, in your opinion?
Oh my gosh, what can we learn from Michael Scott? By what he's done wrong?
Sure, absolutely.
I think, he gets in trouble, right, because of the unbridled tenacity. And, and I think that, not thinking through what he's going to say. It's like it comes out and it's not strategic. And then you're down a trail and everybody just staring at him and doesn't know what to say or do. Right. Right. And so I think that, that's really in courageous cultures, we talk about two really interdependent things. One is, this elegant dance between clarity and curiosity. Clarity around where are we headed, and curiosity about being curious about how can we do that better? How can we get there better? And if you've got an organization that is really high on clarity, and so then everybody's like just doing what they think they want you to do. Right. And I was just talking to an HR person the other day, sure. And she was saying, here's what I think is happening in one of our initiatives. She said, when the senior leader joins the meeting, the only thing the other people in the meeting say is, great idea, about her ideas. Right. And she's like, why are we even having these meetings? Right. If we're just going to do what she says, then why waste everybody's time? Right. And I think that's really, so that would be a high clarity culture that's not showing up curious. And then you also have the high curiosity culture where everybody's got ideas and you're running in a million directions and it's hard to get anything done because it's like everybody's their own cowboy, and that flip side is dangerous too, and so it's really the balance of knowing where you're headed and deliberately getting people aligned and contributing ideas towards that. And when you can get that balance just right and knowing which part you need to be at. So we said, begin where you aren't. So if you are a high clarity culture, right, well, then show up curious for a week and see what happens. If you're a high curiosity culture, maybe say, okay, we got a million ideas. What are our best three? Like, what are we really going to accomplish this next quarter?
Right.
And get people really aligned with that and say, these other ideas are great too. But for now, I need everybody behind these three things.
For sure.
And, I think it's that, those kinds of conversations will prevent you from being like The Office.
Right, for sure. And having to call Toby in for a time or two, for sure. So now I definitely understand that. And now you said something I thought was interesting, because we always hear the phrase begin with the end in mind, but you talk about begin where you aren't. And that also kind of leads to that whole vulnerability thing where, you have to be honest with yourself. So I started mentioning that's something you definitely want to put in your entrepreneurial toolkit for sure. Were you about to say something, Karin?
No.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. I thought you were about to say something. I didn't want to cut you off or be disrespectful or anything like that, for sure. Thank you so much for sharing that. One of the last things I wanted to ask you about the book before we kind of transition is that you talk about chronic restructuring. We see that a lot of times where we're always chasing the carrot. We're always trying to chase the perfect ideal situation, the perfect ideal strategy and stuff like that. Kind of talk about that chronic restructuring a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so that, is a challenge that we see. And, certainly there are times that as you are growing and you got a lot of startups and you're adding people, you're going to need to restructure. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that I find is that if you're constantly restructuring, and I know I experienced this at a very large company, right? So
right.
People are aligned, and all of a sudden they're working, their heads down, they're committed to what they're doing, and then boom, a new boss, new thing.
Right.
Now this. And if people are always waiting for the other shoe to drop, they won't have courage. They're just sort of trying to navigate the politics,
right?
The getting used to the new boss. So I think, to the extent that that's part of clarity is keeping as much consistency as you can and making people feel safe. And as you're doing that, creating that psychological safety, then it's easier. People have more emotional energy to contribute at a deeper level.
Gotcha. Thank you for sharing that. Once again, Startup Nation, we're actually starting to wrap up with Karin Hurt, the author of Courageous Cultures, How to Build Teams of Micro Innovators, Problem Solvers, and Customer Advocates. And once again, Startup Nation, if you want to pick up that book, we have a link there in the show notes for easy access if you're listening to the replay on the podcast. Also, if you want to check out more of what Karin and David do, go to letsgrowleaders.com. We also have that link there in the show notes for easy access. Karin, were you about to say something?
No.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. I wanted to make sure. So Karin, I know you went to school at, Wake Forest and stuff like that. Just kind of share with us your experience there.
Oh, at Wake Forest. That was a really long time ago.
Gotcha. I guess I just want to get an idea of, what college life was for you and stuff like that. So, yeah.
It's interesting because I do tell this story in our keynotes. Sure. Of my journey to be in a sorority. Mm-hmm. So I was really, I was a very academic kind of person.
Gotcha.
But I joined a sorority because I thought I wanted a social life. And so I was really literally one of the most disengaged sorority pledges that there was. I was like barely doing the things that I was supposed to be doing. And
gotcha.
It was, and so I have this story, and I won't tell the whole story because we don't have a lot of time, but
no, you tell the whole story if you want. Just go ahead, go for it.
That's all right. I had, but my sorority president at the time came out and talked to me and engaged with me in such a way that made me really understand like my leadership potential. And I went from being someone who was barely involved, right? And she could have said like, sister, are you in or you're out, right? I mean, gotcha. She really could have done that. Right. But instead she's like, what's wrong? And I was like, I'm going to fail biology and I can't do this. And she really tapped in and helped me to become a leader. And I think that it was a pivotal moment. So I did end up being the president of the sorority. Mm-hmm. And because I was doing that, I was, leading a 120 person organization. I learned how to run effective meetings. I learned how to do the politics and deal with the administration. How do I protect when, one of my sisters does something stupid, and how do I go negotiate with the administration to help her, not get as much trouble and all of those things. And I think what a beautiful opportunity. And I almost would have missed that. Right. If she had just like forced me out and quit. And so I think that's one of the things, sometimes when people are disengaged,
right.
It's not that they don't care. It may be that they don't have the confidence. They don't think they can pull it off. And so one of the things you really need to do is connect with them and understand what's really happening in their world before you write them off.
Right. Right. We see that a lot too often because, I see this in organizations. I see this in, team sports, even it's like we're so focused on like trying to get results. And if that person doesn't give you those results, we're just quick to, like you just said, just write them off. Like, oh, they're uncoachable. We can't do anything with them. So no, I definitely appreciate you sharing that and that story for sure.
No, thank you.
No worries. So I wanted to ask you this, so if I were to ask one of your clients, about, Karin's teaching style, would they say you're the philosopher, you're the encourager, you're the coach, what would they say your teaching style would be when you're engaging with your clients and having these sessions with people?
I would say they would first start by saying visionary, like in terms of helping people to see what they might not normally see.
Gotcha.
And then followed by practitioner. Because one of the things, it is so funny. As you begin and you're all these startup folks listening,
right.
When you begin your company, that you're supposed to say, well, what are we going to be known for? Right. And who are we? And you're defining all that and you're writing your marketing copy. And, we went through all that process, but I think our word found us. And it was interesting. Our word is practical. And, whether or not we were leading giving a keynote to 3,000 people we'd get off the stage or that we'd read the evaluations and, everyone, that was really practical. Or, people are reviewing the book and they, back cover, practical. And then we do our leadership programs. Wow, that was really practical. I can implement this right away. And so at first I was like, I don't know if I want our word to be practical. And like, no, you know what? The world needs practical.
Right.
So we've decided to embrace that. But I think that is definitely what we are known for.
For sure. Thank you for sharing that. And so, also while I was on your Facebook page, I do.
You have been around.
I do a little bit. I saw that, your publisher HarperCollins sent you a nice gift. It was like a cake that looks like your book, if you will. And HarperCollins is a fantastic partner of our show here at the Startup Life, and we just love them greatly. Kind of talk about your relationship and working with the book publisher HarperCollins and stuff like that on your path to write this book.
Yeah, so it was interesting. Very, very supportive.
Gotcha.
So our first book was called Winning Well, A Manager's Guide to Getting Results Without Losing Your Soul.
Right.
And that was published with Amicom. And then HarperCollins acquired Amicom.
Right.
And so, we had a right of first refusal that, was grandfathered over to them. So it was interesting because we didn't know what to expect, right? It's for all intents and purposes, a new publisher for us. But I will tell you from the very beginning, we were treated with such deep respect. And, we pitched the proposal and he's like, yeah, I love this. This is timely. And then from there, one of the things is they really listened to us, and I said, one of the things that made me sad about our first book is that the audiobook was read by somebody other than us.
Got you.
And he's like, yeah, well, we like professional people doing the voiceovers. I'm like, yeah, but it's kind of weird because people hear us at a keynote, right? And then they go hear this guy just reading the thing and, have these signature stories and they're from a woman's point of view and it's kind of weird.
Right.
And so they let us audition to read our own book. And I thought that was really neat. And so we actually read a couple chapters. And then they said yes. And this is what was fascinating to me. They then paid for a really highly professional recording where we went into a studio and, this person listened to every word. I was like, no, repeat that word. It was, really fun experience. Right. And the level of investment in that I thought was really to create a high quality product as well as the editing. So I would highly recommend, if somebody's looking to write a book, HarperCollins is a great partner.
Absolutely. No, we definitely love our friends at HarperCollins. Shout out to our good friend Cicely there in Nashville for sure. I wanted to ask you that for sure. So I want to ask you, this: what's your entrepreneurial superpower and why?
It's the vision from
Fair
leading.
enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Leading the company, and where can we add the most strategic value in a highly changing marketplace?
Gotcha. And it's definitely changing, even outside of the whole pandemic new normal thing. It's definitely changing for sure. And before I ask the last question, I just want to say thank you so much, Karin, for coming on The Startup Life. We definitely enjoyed your time and your insight today. And once again, Startup Nation, that book is Courageous Cultures: How to Build Teams, Micro Innovators, Problem Solvers, and Customer Advocates. We have a link there in the show notes for easy access. Also, letsgrowleaders.com. That link is also there in the show notes for easy access if you're listening to the replay on the podcast. Karin, so, I'm going to turn the microphone over to you because given everything going on, there's a lot of people feeling discouraged, feeling a little down. Give us some words of encouragement to take us out for today, if you don't mind.
So this won't last forever. And so, what I would say is, for me, the thing that I've been doing when I get really down is taking, you got your big strategic vision, and you're going to have things that go well, and you're going to have setbacks. But for each day, what is the most important thing that I can do today? What is the biggest contribution? What is the best relationship I can invest in? And taking it one day at a time. And I just like you, just like all your listeners, there's good days and bad days. And there's days that I'm like, this is never going to end.
Right.
Right. But if you just take it and break it down, I think you can go a long way.
For sure. It's awesome stuff. And that's going to wrap up this session of The Startup Life. Once again, we want to thank Karin Hurt for coming on the show. Thank you so much, man. We really appreciate your time.
Oh, it has been absolutely my pleasure. Delight to work with you.
For sure. And as always, Startup Nation, if you have an idea, be about that life, The Startup Life. If you want to let us know what you think about our show, have an idea for a show topic, or would like to advertise on our show, send us a message on the Startup Life Podcast Facebook page. And while you are there, like and follow our page as well. It's a great way for us to engage with you, Startup Nation, and really grow our community. The link is there in the show notes. Subscribe to the show as it can be heard on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, or even on your Facebook timeline or any other platform you like to get your podcast. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts and you find our content valuable, please give us a 5-star rating, as it will help us climb the charts and help more people find our show. You can also listen to the show on the Startup Life Podcast new website. There you will find the all-new Startup blog, where I write on many topics that are interesting and helpful to you on your path to entrepreneurship. And hey, if you have an idea, be about that life, the Startup Life.